Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. Today, we're so excited because we are here with a guest who's going to tell us about 3 misconceptions about how the brain learns how to read.
Yep. So we have a Carolyn Strom here today, who is a professor in the education department at New York University. And she's an early literacy expert who I actually got to see present at the Reading League last year, the conference. And she made this really tough topic really easy to understand. So I'm very excited to talk to her today. So welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
All right. So we wanted to jump right in because just like us, you were a teacher. And, not all the time when you have a professor of education were they necessarily a teacher in the classroom. So we're really curious about how you went from a classroom teacher to becoming interested in studying so specifically how the brain learns to read.
So yeah, I started my career as a first grade teacher in Compton, California. And anyone that's taught first grade knows that reading is the thing. We really want kids reading by the end of first grade. And I really fell in love with the process of teaching reading. I was lucky enough to have an explicit phonics program, open court at the time. California had this mandate around open court. And my kids were reading. And it is a really amazing experience being a first grade teacher, having kids transform into readers. So I fell in love with it. That's really what kept me in the classroom for about 10 years. And during that time, obviously went to tons of PD and and I had a master's degree. But I realized that after several years of teaching, I didn't really understand what was going on in the brain. Even though I was teaching kids to read, right? I was doing all the things and my kids were readers and I felt like a strong teacher. But when a mom actually said to me, I see my kid working so hard, right, to sound out a word. What is going on, right? I see him staring at these words, sounding them out. What's happening in the brain? And I couldn't tell the parent. I didn't know, even though I knew how to teach reading. I would have been making it up. I realized that after all these hours of PD and a master's degree, I knew how to teach reading well, but I didn't really know what was going on inside the brain. And that felt, that just didn't feel right to me in terms of like a professional base. And that's why I decided to go to graduate school and get a PhD and sort of really understand the research about how kids learn to read.
But probably true for most teachers, right? That they know the moves to make in the classroom, but I couldn't have said what was happening in the brains of my students when they were learning, for sure.
Right. And when you begin to understand really how something works, like how a system works, then you can figure out what's not working, right? You know, sort of the mechanisms. And I didn't really feel like I understood the mechanisms, and that even became clear when I was working a lot with dyslexic students. Right during my graduate work. And I was like, I don't feel like I would have been able to do that if I didn't have a deeper understanding of how the brain learns to read and why sort of the sound processing is so important. And where, so there's a lot there. It's so rich. And I think that sometimes the neuroscience especially is really dense. And written for people with a background in neuroscience. And I don't believe that educators and families necessarily need a deep background in neuroscience. They just need to understand like the basics of what's going on in the brain in the same way that we would want our physical therapist to understand anatomy, right? It's just understanding a little bit of what's going on inside.
Yeah.
That really intrigued me. Still intrigues me to this day,
Yeah, I think as we dive into like what's going on inside the brain, you highlighted in our pre-call 3 misconceptions about how the brain learns to read. And I think you just put them so clearly that you're right. Like, even though I don't have a background in neuroscience, I can still understand what you're sharing. Is there a way to kind of just start off with the first misconception, and then we'll ask you questions that pop up along the way, but maybe if you could start with that first misconception and just kind of explain to us what are some misconceptions about how the brain learns how to read?
So I've encountered these misconceptions over the last, 5 or 10 years, sort of working with teachers and working in schools around change and early literacy, and realized that a lot of the families and educators had these misconceptions. And that was kind of like where some of the misguided practices were coming from, right? It's that they held these sort of misconceptions. And the first one, I'm sure we're all very familiar with, is that reading is natural. So there's this misconception out there that just like kids naturally learn to speak, right? If we immerse them in spoken language, then if we immerse them in print, we immerse them with books, then they'll learn to read. right? And that's very prevalent. Don't push the kid, right? They don't necessarily need instruction. It will come naturally. And that's just simply not true. Learning to speak is very different than learning to read. And we can see all over the world, millions of people develop spoken language and millions of people don't learn to read. Right? Because it doesn't just happen spontaneously. It requires schooling. It requires instruction. And it's a code. It's an invented code. That's what the alphabet is, right? It's these squiggles, lines, and dots that represent sounds that we came up with only 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. Right? It's a very new invention. So there's just no way that it's something that occurs naturally. But what that ends up leading to, if we believe, right, that reading is natural and it occurs just like spoken language, and all we need to do is submerge kids in print, then we're really sort of turning away from the importance of explicit instruction. Right. So that's sort of the outcome of this misconception, is that we say, oh, it'll occur naturally. Let's wait. Right. Sometimes it's called the wait and see approach, or the maturation perspective. They'll just evolve into that. But actually, like that just takes away from how important explicit instruction is. Right. I often say that, reading is taught, not caught. For some kids, it does. It feels like it's caught. Right. But really, for most kids, it must be taught. And that's, if we believe it's natural, then we're not going to believe that, right? Like we'll just believe it will be caught. And we don't have the luxury to think like that.
That's such an important point, that it does actually kind of happen like that for some kids, some students, but that's not the norm.
Right. And for the kids that it happens with, it may be that they got a lot informally early on with their phonemic awareness, for example, right? Mm-hmm. And or their early writing. Like they may have had, it may seem like it just popped on, right, or clicked, but in fact, there's other things, that inputs they got that we can't see.
Yeah, I just saw an anecdotal story somewhere, probably on social media, where someone said something like that, like their second child just kind of picked it up. They don't know where it came from, but it was actually because they watched a lot of what was going on with their older child, like bringing home homework and working with them on things, and they just saw some of those things happening, that they picked up on those.
Yes.
So it wasn't just a natural thing. It actually still had the input just from somewhere else.
Right, exactly. But I think it's a romantic version of literacy, that like surround kids with books and surround kids with conversation, and they'll fall in love with this process and they'll naturally learn to read. And it's just not true. We're not wired for this. It's not going to work like that. And it requires structure.
What would you say to parents or teachers who do say that? Like, oh, I just turned around and, my child can read, or, oh, my child really struggled last year, but they stepped into a classroom this year and it seems like they've really got it.
I mean, then I just say, more power to you. Like, that, it's awesome. Your kid is reading. Your kid is not my concern, honestly. Like, I'm concerned about the kids who are not reading and who everyone's saying, oh, they'll just get it. But I do say, I say what I said before, like, it may seem like that, right? But it's likely that there's actually a lot of phonemic awareness built in somewhere in their life, right? And it's, for some kids, that process of building the circuit is easier, right? But for most kids, we need to teach it, and it really doesn't hurt anyone to actually be explicitly teaching and monitoring progress, right? And doing sort of very specific moves that are going to promote building the reading circuit. Because that is what we're doing, right? We're building a circuit. It's not, we don't come with a center for reading. So we got to build it.
Yeah. Do you want to dig in a little bit more there? I mean, you've already mentioned several things, but, we wanted to ask you about what are the implications here for teachers and for parents? Like, what do we need to do? If not just, parents hear that all the time. Just immerse them and read to them. It'll be great, but what does this really mean for parents and especially our teachers of our youngest students?
So, of course, yes, we want books in the home. We want access to libraries. You do want tons of books, right? And texts. And you do want to be reading to your kids. And you also want to be pointing out environmental print, right? You also want to sort of make kids not only aware of books, but of print in the environment, stop signs, any kind of signs, the signs at your school, logos, cereal boxes, right? Pointing out the print in the world is definitely important, right? All of that is, I guess, quote unquote, natural, right? Using what is in your environment. And we want to have a print rich environment, of course, but also realize that we need to be explicit, right? And make sure that kids are involved in some kind of instructional program that has a scope and sequence, for example, right? That doesn't just assume kids are going to pick up the letter patterns in our environment, right? Because it's not intuitive and it's not natural. So when you're thinking about the instruction your kid is receiving, is there a scope and sequence, right? Is there a plan for progress monitoring? Is there a plan for practice? Right? Are there decodable texts? I mean, I'm getting like super in the weeds here, right? But like these are
like the weeds.
Okay, great. So you want there to be these structures, these specific structures involved, right? And I'm not saying that at 3 years old you're doing letters sound flashcards, right? That's not what I'm saying, right? But you're following some kind of scope and sequence around either phonemic awareness, right? And then an awareness of sounds, and then moving into letter sounds. There's a plan for writing, right? There's a plan for teaching handwriting. There's a plan for how we handle irregular words, right? So if we take this misconception that reading is natural and we accept, no, it's not, it needs to be taught. Well, then there's like a whole science of teaching reading, right? And that's the biggest implication of accepting that we're not wired for reading and it's not natural.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think I'm hearing both from like, if I'm a teacher at a school, these are things I should be looking for in curriculum, in my training. I should be looking to have these, and if not, advocating for them. And same with parents, right? As you're either choosing a school or signing up for a school, like looking and asking for, what is the structure? How's literacy being taught? What's the scope and sequence? Those seem like the right questions
and
to be asking.
Yes, exactly. And as you're speaking, I'm just like, wait, there's a caveat though, right? Because we're talking about we get into talking about early childhood, right? 3 to 5 year olds, 3 to 6 year olds. So there is also you don't necessarily need to push, right? If a kid at 3 years old, right? For a kid to be reading and writing, some kids with certain inputs are going to pick it up at that age, but it is okay we want to be developmentally appropriate. Right? So the letters and sounds and structures, there should be for 3 and 4 year olds, right? But it's going to look different than for 5 and 6 year olds. Does that make sense? Right? It's going to be even more playful and more song based and much more phonemic awareness. So when I say prescribed and scope and sequence, I really mean just like a plan, right? A plan that's developmentally appropriate, but that there is a plan, not just a spontaneous, we're going to surround them with print and they're going to begin to pick up how print and sounds work together.
That's so funny. I have a 4-year-old who just started in pre-K, and they sent home a paper that said, what are your goals for your student this year? And I started to go I was like ready to, write down all the things of all the letter sounds and this and that. And then at the end I was like, also like have fun. I want him to have fun. And like, he's a kid still.
Who just started preschool too. That's so funny. And I'm totally with you. And yeah, exactly. You do want them to have fun. You want them to have 20 to 30 minutes of some phonemic awareness and letter sound. You want them to have some of that, but really you do want them to have fun. And it is fun. I mean, we'll get into that, but phonics and phonemic awareness is fun. There's this kind of like dichotomy out there that like, oh, phonics is the boring stuff. It's the mechanics. You got to just get through it to get to the meaning. And like teaching phonics is very fun, right? You can make super engaging.
It's so fun. Yeah.
It's so fun. Kids get so excited, right? When they learn all the tricks of our language and they learn the way it works, and it's a pattern, it's a code. So it can be fun. It is fun, right? So, and that sort of connects us to some of the other misconceptions, but I think we've covered misconception 1.
Yeah. I mean, I have one last question about it though.
Yeah.
If I'm a parent or a teacher listening and I am hearing you say explicit instruction with a systematic scope and sequence, but I'm not sure what that means. Do you have any recommendations? Because I think there's really good stuff out there and there's not so great stuff. So I can start with an example. So I've been seeing all the hubbub about UFly. So I ordered myself a UFly manual, right? It is very clear if you're reading this UFly manual, exactly what the scope and sequence is. And then I'm also going to say that I live in a district that has Readers Writers Workshop. They have the phonics. It's very clear that phonics program was input, like kind of like backdated, right? So it was like, so if I'm in a district and I'm seeing like a systematic scope and sequence, I'm looking for specific things. And if I'm a parent, I probably have zero idea, right?
I'm glad
what
you
I'm looking
mentioned
for.
UFly. So for any school that I work with, pretty much, we either made the transition to UFly or are making the transition to UFly away from some other phonics programs because UFly is so efficient. It's efficient and it's very much like you can use it tomorrow, right? There's
very
tons
easy
of support, very easy, and games, and a really great social media community. The Facebook UFly group is wonderful, and so and UFly is basically free. You just pay for the teacher's guide, right? So it's such a great program, and I think it's a great model. Right. So when I'm thinking about like one of the things I love about UFly is like it's 128 lessons. Right. So no matter what grade, it's always that is like an amazing scope and sequence. We really know how it's organized. Right. And you don't cover all 128 in any grade. Right. There are some you skip. There's an order for each grade. But that's what we mean by a scope and sequence. We know the scope of what's being covered and we know the sequence. Right. And with younger children, right, UFly is primarily K2 and intervention. And so that's a great model for any educator or family.
All right, Carolyn, can you tell us about the second misconception?
Yeah, so the second misconception that I've experienced in my work with educators and families is around this idea of how we actually learn to read words and from memory, right? How we remember words, how we store them. And there's this misconception sometimes that we memorize words. Right, especially irregular words. So a word like laugh, right, L-A-U-G-H. You might tell a child like, oh, you just have to memorize it. English is so tricky. English is so irregular. There's this like memorization perspective out there, which leads to looking at words as wholes, as like that we memorize words as wholes somehow.
Lots of flashcards.
As flashcards, yep, and the word shape method, right? And that's just a real misconception about how learning happens, how we store words in memory. It really happens through mapping, not memorizing. And by mapping, I mean like we're mapping the specific letters to sounds or letter patterns to sounds. Right, that's what we see. We see that in all of the brain research, especially. Right, we talked about how we have no center for reading. We have to build this circuit. And if we look at how we build the circuit, what we're doing is we're connecting the visual form of the word, what you see with your vision perception, right, with your vision, to sounds and then to meaning. So there's three primary areas of the brain, lots of other areas of the brain that are involved, but these three primary areas that make up like the neural form of a word, right? And that's what we mean by mapping. We're mapping a word's pronunciation, right, to the way that the letters are, to its letters, and to its meaning. So that's...
And when you say mapping, real quick, that's literally what's happening in our brain, like those things that you're talking about.
You're connecting like there are neurons, right, that specialize for vision, to recognize faces and objects, right? And so we're retuning those neurons, right, so that they recognize letters of a specific script and then can map those letters to a sound. Right, that's the first level of mapping. We have to map these letters, these squiggles, lines, and dots, right? They don't mean anything. They're complete abstractions. They don't mean anything. We have to map them to sounds, right? And once we do that, we map, let's say, the S and the H straight to sh, and the I to I, and then p and sh, ip. You've mapped the letters and sounds, but now you need to map that pronunciation and that letter sequence to something, to a ship, right? To what that means.
Right.
And now those three representations, if you will, are connected, right? The what a ship is, how a ship sounds, and then what the letters look like in sequence. And the more you do that, right? We say the neurons that fire together wire together. The more that you connect those those three representations, the more that you're beginning to store. It creates like a little neural address for that word, kind of, in what's eventually Stanislas Dehaene calls the letterbox. Is an area that we develop, expert readers develop that is really specialized for recognizing words and letter sequences within words. But the first level of mapping is letter to sound or symbol to sound, right? And then we map the letter sequences to the pronunciation and the meaning.
I'm curious about, because the goal of that is that that becomes so automatic, right? That you see ship and it's like you don't even have to think about it. You know the sounds, you know the word, you know everything very quickly. Is that where the misconception comes from about memorizing, that it feels like we're memorizing it because it eventually becomes so quick?
I think that's right. I'm not sure exactly where the misconception comes from, but people have suggested that it comes from this idea of like the expert's blind spot, right? So all of us are expert readers. We read with automaticity. We don't think about it. All of our cognitive energy can go towards meaning, right? It's something we're doing. And so for expert readers, we forget actually what our brain was like before we could read. And it does feel to us that we're just, memorizing the letter sequence. But there's tons of studies to prove that that's not what we're doing. Although it was an early misconception in early reading research as well. But that's not what we're doing. We map, right? Even when part of a word is irregular, we're still mapping it.
Yeah. It's like taking apart something that you can do so fluently to almost like try to break it down to be less fluent so that you could figure out how you got so fluent. It's like really an impossible task for an expert to do. It's really hard.
Yes, and people have written about it with musicians, right? Professional musicians who like don't remember what it was like before they could do it. They can't describe what they do because it's so in their body and it's so automatic, right? And exactly, that's for readers. We have to we have to imagine what it's like to not have this skill, right, in order to understand how difficult it is. But the cool thing about our brains is that we have this capacity for automaticity. That's what I think is so amazing, right? Like if you look at a script that you've never seen before, like I do this with Korean, right? I can't read Korean, but if I look at something in Korean, it truly just looks like lines, just squiggles and lines to me, right? Yeah. And it's amazing to me that I could theoretically learn to read that so that it would add to a place of automaticity. It's incredible. So we have this capacity for automaticity. So then it feels like we've just memorized everything, but we haven't. We've mapped it, right? And I think the power of understanding the mapping, especially at the letter level, is like if you understand what our brain has to do, right, in order to recognize letters, it's pretty phenomenal because we're using an area of our brain, I think I mentioned before, that is specialized for really recognizing faces and objects, right, not letters. And so that's why we see things like mirror invariance, which is when kids confuse B and D and P and Q, right? That's evidence of the fact that they're using this part of their brain that recognizes objects. And when objects are flipped, they're still the same object, right? So we're reusing this part of our brain that actually sees mirror images the same, right? And we have to unlearn that in order to really acquire an alphabetic literacy.
So that's so neat. So what could parents and teachers do? Like, what are the implications for parents and teachers listening in regards to memorizing versus mapping misconception?
So much. Okay. So first, when we think about teaching kids letters and sounds, right, we want to make it meaningful. And, if you think of a W, there's no reason why a W, like the zigzag W, would say W, would make the W sound. There's no reason why when we want to write water, we would spell it with a W because W starts with D, right? And it doesn't, right? So there's no correlation. Right. But when you use a method called embedded pictures or embedded picture mnemonics, and maybe you turn the W into a worm and and the W is in the shape of a worm and a worm is in the shape of a W. It's visual, so I don't know if I'm making any sense, but, then a kid looks at that, right? And they think worm. And so they associate the shape of the W with a worm. And that's an embedded alphabet method that is really, really beneficial for young children, even more beneficial if the characters are engaging, right? And there's songs to go along with it and rhymes and handwriting. The program that I like to use with preschools is called Letterland. We've used that with a bunch of preschools. It's one embedded picture mnemonic method, but there are others. I know that Spellphabet has one online. I think they're based out of Australia, and it's just cards that have embedded pictures in the alphabet. And so I guess my main takeaway here and why I spent a little time on it is that's what makes sort of learning the alphabet can be fun, right? So we want to make this sort of abstract process. It's called paired associate learning when you're looking at a symbol and connecting it with a sound, right? We want to make that meaningful and fun, and one way to do that is by embedding pictures into the alphabetic symbols.
I was just going to say, I see a lot of flags on those. So I think sometimes you have to be a cautious consumer, right? Of Like I've seen one even where I'm not even making this up, that the K example was a night, like Knight. And I was like, well, like
That's not
the worst example. There is not even a K sound in there at all. So yeah, they're not all that bad, but I know that some of them do have some.
Of course. And just so Letterland,
just make
is
sure
one
they're good ones.
Yes, there's a bunch of research around Letterland, which is why that's the one I always recommend. So yeah, definitely conscious consumer. And just because a letter is next to an object does not make it embedded, right? It actually has to be embedded in the letter's shape, if that makes sense. And yeah, so the other thing I wanted to say about mapping, not memorizing, the implication of understanding that we're not memorizing, we're mapping, is really for spelling. So with spelling, the only way to spell, right, is sequentially, right? Like left to right, taking it sound by sound. That really helps set up the mapping in our brain. And so over time, yes, it's going to become automatic, right? Your hand or your fingers on the keyboard are going to become automatic with that, right? But if we understand that we're not actually just like memorizing the spellings of these strings, we're initially mapping them all to sounds, and that mapping them to sounds really helps us set up those letter sequences in our brain, then I think people will pay more attention. I'm hoping people will pay more attention to the role of dictation and the role of handwriting, because we know that sort of the motor area of our brain, I call it the handwriting hub, but the motor area of our brain, when we involve that area of our brain in learning to read, right, it really helps build the circuit more effectively.
Yeah, I see this question a lot too that comes up where someone will say their student or their child, they can read, right? They seem like they're reading really well, they're decoding words, but then their spelling is really not great. And the answer I always see, which you can correct me if I'm wrong, is like, well, they've memorized words then. And that's like, I mean, okay for right now, but that's going to be a problem in the long run.
Exactly. And they must have very good visual memory, right? Not all kids have that kind of good visual memory they must not have very good visual memory, right? Kids who seem to pick up spelling, like you said, I think later, they have a strong visual memory, but some kids don't, right? And they really need to learn those mappings really systematically. Yeah. And I often say, so there are some people that say, oh, my kid can read, they don't need kind of an explicit phonics. But first of all, it's usually only 20-30 minutes a day. It's not like the whole day. And second of all, it really helps them develop spelling pattern, like correct spelling. So important. And we should be careful because, there's a different kind of continuum between spelling mastery of decodable words and spelling mastery of irregular words, right? It can take some kids very long, way past first grade, right, to remember the sequence and map sort of irregular words like laugh or through, THROUGH, right? But they will be able to recognize when they see them. They'll be able to read them but not spell them. But with decodable words, right, that are multisyllabic, like napkin, right, we can master that much earlier than we can master a longer irregular word for spelling.
Carolyn, like what you just said, that kids might be able to read it but not spell it as easily, for example, the word through, like an irregular word. Can you say more about that, like why that is? And as teachers or parents, is there anything we can do to help?
Yeah, so, the research answer would be, well, the representation is not fully established, right, in their circuit, right? So they can recognize it, right? And they can ratchet to pronunciation and maybe they know the meaning, right? But until you can like really spell the word and you've internalized the letter sequences and really tied these three representations together along with your motor memory, it hasn't been fully established, right? And I think it probably goes back to the fact that recognition is much easier than production, right? So in the same way that like receptive language, it develops faster than expressive language, right? Reception and sort of recognition of a word is much easier for like your memory than production and actually creating the letter string. But I don't think there's a name for that phenomenon when they can read it and not spell it. I think it's like the representation isn't fully secure for as rich as it could be. Yeah, I think the one thing I would just add on this idea about like, we map words, we don't memorize them, right? Is I want to emphasize that we're really mapping the how a like letter, right? Letter and letter strings to the sounds and to meaning, right? So when we're teaching early word reading and decoding, it's also important to talk about that meaning of the word, right? Decoding isn't just mapping, like blending sounds together, right? It is attaching to meaning. So there's a place, a very important place for vocabulary development and word knowledge within decoding instruction, right?
That's a really good point.
An early word like a CVC word, right? Pen, right? There's multiple meanings of pen, right? There's pen where animals are. There's pen you write with. So there's ways to embed sort of multiple meaning and more advanced vocabulary work with decoding, even simple CVC words. So I just want to make sure that, with this emphasis on decoding words, I just want to also emphasize that the meaning of the words is important, especially for multilingual kids, but for everybody.
Yeah, because we usually separate that vocabulary and comprehension like it's a totally separate bucket of work, but
exactly.
It's very, very basic comprehension,
exactly.
But it is still comprehending that one single word. What does it mean?
Yes, we do want to map these words, right? Once we've read them, now map them to meaning. And that really helps secure the representation in our brain, right?
Yeah.
So we don't want to ignore the role of meaning in word level learning.
Which is why the pictures make it so helpful, right?
Right.
All right, the last.
Yeah, so the third misconception that I've observed is this idea kind of related to the misconception one, like that learning to read is natural, but it's this idea that like reading will click, right? It just kind of like clicks without practice, right? And so a lot of people say, oh yeah, one day, I really think they'll just pick up the right book and be motivated and it'll click. It'll all come together. This whole complex thing will come together. And it's sort of like this click and then like off away you go or something. And that really undermines the role of practice. So if we know that reading is not natural, if we know it's a mapping process and we need to do it to automaticity, right? So we can free up our cognitive energy and our working memory for meaning, then we know we need practice in order to get to a place of mastery. And to think or believe or conceive of reading as something that's just like with the right book or the right teacher, it's just going to click, all come together, really doesn't give proper sort of attention to the importance of building skills. And I think that sometimes that comes from this idea that like, to focus on skills implies like you're doing some sort of drill and kill approach. Like you're drilling them and skilling them, and that's just killing the motivation and the meaning, right, and the joy. And I prefer to think of it as like drill, skill, and thrill, because the more that you embed practice, I mean, drilling is just practice. There's what's wrong with practice, right? And so, like, the more that you practice, the more skills you're going to get. And the more thrilling it's going to be for you to do this skill. And we can see that if you've ever seen a 5 or 6-year-old learning to read, even if it's very simple words, it is thrilling. It is exciting. You can see them feeling that independence, right? And a lot of times the way you can practice foundational skills, any skill really, but a lot of the foundational skills really lend themselves to very playful, engaging, dare I say thrilling practices. Right? So there's a lot of phonemic awareness games where you play with sounds that are really, can be very, very engaging and fun with kids. One I do with preschoolers, and what I've been doing with my daughter is fiddle with the middle, right? Where I say, okay, we got to go put on our sacks, right? Or we got to go put on our souks, right? Or no, you're right. And she says, socks, right? And that's what I said. We have to go put on our seeks, right? So I just keep changing that vowel, right? And it's just a quick fiddle with the middle game that you can play that kids love. And what it's doing is tuning their ears into these medial vowel sounds. So that's just one small example, right, of how sort of we can build routines in, or the importance of building routines in, because practice and routines are so important, because reading to becoming a skilled reader requires lots of practice, right? And if we just believe it's going to click and it's not going to require the hours and hours of practice, then a lot of kids are not going to get to where they need to be. They're not going to reach automaticity because they're waiting for this click moment, and it requires practice, and a lot of repeated practice and gamification of practice and engaging. There's ways to like get those dopamine hits while you're playing games related to building your foundational skills.
I love that you brought up like that this drill does get just a terrible connotation, like, oh, people just use that word like, oh, you're just drilling kids. But I love that you brought up that it just means practice and we need it. But then also it doesn't have to just be boring, right? That it doesn't have to just be worksheets. It shouldn't be necessary, especially for younger kids.
No, word games. Yeah, look at Wordle. Do people still play Wordle? Isn't Wordle really popular? I mean, people love Wordle, right? Like they're playing with the sequences of words, right? As kids get older, that's a great resource, right? Like just word games and sound games. It actually can be a very fun and analytical process. So, and also I also say the best way to practice really early phonemic awareness and letter recognition is early handwriting, right? And experimental spelling and encouraging young children to write using sounds. And that's not drilling them, right? We're not having them copy books, right, onto paper. We're not drilling them in any way or form, but we're building in that practice, right? That practice to build this circuit that doesn't come naturally, that we don't come wired with. And one thing, go back to UFly, one thing I love I love so many things about UFly. One of the things I love is that they have the roll and reads. For every single skill, they have these roll and reads where you roll a dice, you read a word, and I've been to classrooms where kids absolutely love playing this and they color it. I mean, they're not bored, right? And right. When I was working with dyslexic kids and who need lots of practice at this, I mean, the only way to do the practice with them was games that were super engaging, right? So it's practice. We need practice. It's not going to click.
Yeah, Lori and I talk about this a lot, that, we send kids to sports practices to do just this, right? They do these drills.
Such a good point.
And they love it because they're getting better at it and they can see, I mean, again, my child's only 4, but he does go to basketball practice and he sees that, when he does this over and over and over again, he's getting better. And that is what's motivating, is that he's like, now I'm making it in the hoop. So I want to keep doing it.
And when you start to learn, it's the same exact thing. When you start to learn an instrument, you have to learn the scales, right? Like there's these just basic skills that we do drill. And we kind of want that in every other skill that we practiced automaticity. But somehow with reading, this notion of having to drill it and practice things, it's become this like drill and kill and this awful sort of thing when it's exactly what we need and has to be reframed.
I will say, when I was in first grade, I remember doing worksheets. And so I can see how it could have gotten a bad rap if that's all you're doing is worksheets. Again,
right? I totally agree with you, but there's a certain amount of the day, right, devoted to this stuff. It's like not all worksheets are created equal.
That's true too.
Right? There can be a really good worksheet, which is really just a very good exercise, right? It can also be a task on a tablet, right? They're just exercises, right? They're exercises, but I agree. We don't want to overdo it with just passive busy work. No one wants that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We want engagement, right? Without engagement, this is something Stanislas Dehaene has talked about and proven a lot in his work, that like we need the engagement. Without the engagement, we lose, the brain goes off track. Like that engagement is so important. So we need the drill and practice. And yes, it needs to be engaging and active. The kids need to be actively involved in it, not passive, right? Like drill doesn't have to be passive. Maybe that's the way of framing it. I frame it as skill and thrill instead of drill and kill because I like a good rhyme, but it really needs to be reframed. We've covered a lot of ground. One area we haven't maybe covered as much is what happens with the multilingual or the bilingual brain as it's learning to read. So I just want to add, what we know is that it's good. It's a very good thing for us to engage, right? Our bilingual brains. We're all capable of learning more than one language. And it really has many benefits, right? And we know that the importance is the development of spoken language, right? So when we were talking about building this circuit, the reading circuit is built on top of the spoken language circuit, right? So we have the spoken language circuit, and the best thing we can do early on, right, is build our areas for spoken language, because the reading circuit is literally like built on top of it. And so building spoken language, building vocabulary is so important for all learners, but especially for multilingual learners, right? Because the strength in one spoken language transfers to another, and we just really want to make that circuit so strong, and it's founded in spoken language. And I think that connects to something I've seen in the upper grades and middle grades around comprehension. So, I've seen this idea from some people that like comprehension is just about skills, right? It's about finding the main idea. It's about inferencing. And we know actually from a lot of the cognitive science and research on comprehension that actually it's grounded in knowledge, right? And conceptual knowledge. And we really need to build knowledge to build comprehension and not just think of it as just like a skill activity. And so I think that really ties into what I'm sort of saying about multilingual learners and bilingual learners, that we really need to ground our lessons, not just in skills, but in knowledge, which inevitably, includes vocabulary, and doing it in all those structured, engaging ways.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I'm really glad you brought that up because, at the beginning we kind of said reading is so different from speaking, right? But they do really tie together, and it's really important that they come together.
So important. Yes, that's such a good point. Like like reading does not develop like speaking, but it's dependent on spoken language. Reading is absolutely dependent on our spoken language. You can't read unless you have a spoken language base, but at the same time, they don't develop in the same way. I think that's a really important distinction, Melissa.
And this knowledge building that you're bringing up can actually start even through just spoken language from when they're really young. Yes. And kids get so engaged. We all do, right? Because we're people we're meaning making people, but kids get so engaged in knowledge, right? So engaged in learning about all the different kinds of snakes, or where snakes live, what snakes eat. Like there's knowledge is very engaging. And helps us build our conceptual knowledge and our spoken language network. So when I think, when people think of the science of reading, it's not just foundational skills, right? It's the importance of how we build comprehension and textual understanding. And so much of that comes from knowledge building and building concept knowledge. Yeah. And it's kind of wild how much young kids can take in. Like I said, my 4-year-old, sometimes it's silly stuff like Hot Wheels. I mean, he knows all these names of all these Hot Wheels. But then sometimes I'm like thinking, one of the Hot Wheels is called Mohawk Warrior, and now he knows what a Mohawk is. Like that's like, I mean, it's kind of silly, but at the same time, like he's building some knowledge there about the world.
And a whole memory network, he's really building.
I mean, he does some serious things too, not just Hot Wheels, but that is his thing at the moment.
Is he classifying them?
I don't know.
Step.
Thank you for that pointer.
Because it's when kids are in that phase that is like in the collecting phase, right? Having a lot of one thing, then organizing it. I mean, don't push it if your kid is like my daughter, who's like, no, I will not be organizing them. Any little minor task, extra task, I know. But some kids do like sorting and organizing, and it's good. It's good practice.
I love that. Well, before we go, I just want to ask you, this was a really big topic. We just hit on some misconceptions today. I'm sure there's a million more things we could have asked you about the brain and how it learns to read, but do you have any suggestions for where people could learn more?
Yeah. So I have a newsletter. You can sign up for that on my website. It's just carolynstrom.com, or you can email me at hello@carolynstrom.com. I believe there's still a poster on the website of sort of my conception of the brain. I'm working on a longer piece about it. But if you're curious in general about sort of more, I really recommend Stanislas Dehaen's work, Reading in the Brain. He's an amazing writer, an amazing researcher, and is really the pioneer in the field, along with the work of Marianne Wolf. I'm sure people have talked about her book on here before, Proust and the Squid. Sally Shawitz's Overcoming Dyslexia, also a great and accessible book about the brain, all sort of talking about the concepts we spoke about today.
Great. Well, thank you for those recommendations, and thank you so much for sharing all of this wonderful information with us today. We're so thankful.
Thank you for hosting this great podcast. Bye.